Her husband left her because she gave him 3 daughters and no son. So when Emily walked into a small Vermont bakery on a rainy afternoon, she believed no man would ever choose her again. She had no family, little money, and 3 little girls holding on to her coat like she was the last safe place in the world. But the quiet baker behind the counter saw something everyone else had missed. And when her past came back to take everything from her, his simple kindness became the first step toward a family neither of them thought they deserved. A cold spring rain drifted across the quiet streets of a small Vermont town. Gray clouds dimmed the afternoon sky, while the comforting scent of fresh bread floated through the nearly empty Main Street. Nathan Carter was 35 years old, a man whose calm presence often made people feel at ease before he even spoke. He stood just over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, shaped by years of kneading dough before sunrise rather than lifting weights. His dark brown hair was always neatly trimmed, though a few loose strands usually escaped onto his forehead by the end of each workday. A short, well-kept beard framed a strong jawline softened by warm hazel eyes that carried kindness more naturally than confidence. Most customers described Nathan as patient, dependable, and quietly generous. Children adored him because he always slipped an extra cookie into their paper bags, while elderly customers appreciated that he never rushed their conversations. Yet behind that gentle smile lived a loneliness few people noticed. Nathan had never married. It wasn't because he feared commitment or disliked companionship. Years earlier, his parents had died within months of each other after a terrible highway accident during a winter storm. Overnight, the bakery his father had built became Nathan's entire world. While his friends built families, celebrated weddings, and watched their children grow, Nathan woke every morning at 3 o'clock to mix dough, prepare pastries, and keep the little bakery alive. Somewhere along the years, he stopped believing there would ever be time for love. His bakery, Carter's Bread House, had become both his purpose and his shelter. The polished oak shelves displayed fresh sourdough loaves, cinnamon rolls, fruit pies, and buttery croissants. The windows fogged gently from the warmth of the ovens while soft jazz played quietly through an old radio that had belonged to his father. A large orange tabby cat named Marmalade, nearly 10 years old and considerably overweight from stealing scraps of pastry, slept peacefully beside the front window every afternoon. Customers joked that Marmalade worked harder greeting visitors than Nathan did. Business had slowed since several large supermarkets opened nearby, but Nathan refused to sacrifice quality. Every loaf was still made by hand. Every customer was greeted by name whenever possible. Profit mattered, but pride mattered more. That rainy Saturday, hardly anyone ventured outside. Nathan wiped flour from the wooden counter before glancing toward the empty street. Rainwater streamed steadily down the windows, turning the sidewalks into shimmering ribbons of gray. He considered closing early. Then the small brass bell above the entrance rang. Nathan looked up. A woman stepped cautiously inside, immediately apologizing before she had even crossed the doorway. "I'm sorry. We're only trying to get out of the rain for a few minutes." Her voice carried exhaustion more than embarrassment. Emily Brooks looked around 33 years old, though constant worry made her appear older. She was tall with a naturally graceful posture that hardship had slowly bent forward over the years. Long chestnut brown hair escaped from a loose ponytail, damp from the storm, clinging to the sides of her pale face. Her gentle blue eyes were beautiful despite the heavy shadows beneath them from countless sleepless nights. She wore an inexpensive beige coat that had clearly been repaired several times, yet it was clean and carefully maintained. Emily possessed the quiet politeness of someone who had spent years trying not to inconvenience anyone. Behind her stood 3 little girls. Lily Brooks, the oldest at 10 years old, had shoulder-length brown hair and thoughtful blue eyes much like her mother's. Thin for her age, she instinctively positioned herself beside her younger sisters, as though protecting them without being asked. Her cautious expression revealed a child who had grown up too quickly. 7-year-old Emma Brooks was shorter, energetic despite the rain, with freckles scattered across her cheeks and curly brown hair that bounced every time she moved. Curiosity seemed to shine through every smile she offered, though she glanced nervously toward her mother before touching anything. Little Grace Brooks, only 4 years old, clung tightly to Emily's hand. Her golden brown curls framed a round face that still carried the innocence untouched by fully understanding why their lives had changed. She buried her face against her mother's coat whenever strangers looked her way. Nathan smiled warmly. You picked the right place to hide from Vermont rain. The girls relaxed almost immediately. Nathan disappeared into the kitchen and returned carrying 4 warm cinnamon rolls and steaming cups of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream for the children. Emily's eyes widened. We really can't afford. They're already made, Nathan interrupted gently. It would be a shame if they went to waste. She hesitated. Experience had taught her that kindness often arrived carrying invisible conditions. Still, Grace's hopeful eyes finally convinced her. The girls quietly gathered around a small wooden table near the window. Within minutes, soft laughter replaced the silence that had entered with them. Nathan noticed something that unsettled him. Every sudden sound outside made Lily glance toward the door. Emma instinctively reached for her mother's sleeve whenever thunder echoed overhead. Even Grace refused to let go of Emily completely. Children weren't usually this alert. As Emily watched her daughters eat warm pastries with smiles she had not seen in weeks, tears quietly gathered in her eyes before she quickly blinked them away. Nathan pretended not to notice. Instead, he busied himself arranging bread that didn't need arranging. Eventually, Emily spoke. We moved here 3 weeks ago. Nathan simply nodded, allowing silence to invite honesty. My husband. She began before correcting herself. My ex-husband. The word seemed painful simply to pronounce. He wanted a son. Nathan looked at her quietly. Emily lowered her eyes to the table. After Lily. Everyone said maybe next time. She smiled sadly. After Emma, they said keep trying. Her voice became smaller. When Grace was born, she whispered. His parents told him our family had no future. Nathan felt something tighten inside his chest. Emily continued, staring at her folded hands. Several months later he left us. She forced another fragile smile. He married another woman who was expecting a baby boy. The bakery suddenly felt much quieter than before. Nathan looked toward the 3 little girls happily sharing crumbs of cinnamon rolls. Not one of them realized they had ever been considered disappointments. Emily watched them too. Her shoulders slowly sank beneath the weight she had carried for years. Almost without realizing she had spoken aloud, she whispered, no one will ever marry a woman with 3 daughters. The sentence lingered in the warm bakery like the fading sound of rain against glass. Nathan looked directly into her eyes. His answer came naturally, without hesitation. That's only because they haven't met you. Emily froze. For the first time in years, someone had looked beyond everything she believed made her impossible to love. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside the little bakery, neither of them realized that 6 simple words had quietly begun changing both of their lives forever. 3 days after the rainstorm, soft morning sunlight stretched across the quiet streets of the Vermont town as the scent of fresh bread drifted through the crisp spring air. The bakery windows glowed warmly against the cool breeze. Nathan had almost convinced himself Emily would never return. People who had survived disappointment often mistook kindness for pity, and pity was something proud people rarely accepted. Even while shaping dough before sunrise, he occasionally found himself glancing toward the front door, wondering whether the woman with the tired blue eyes had already decided his offer came with hidden expectations. Late Thursday morning, the little brass bell above the entrance chimed. Emily stepped inside alone. She wore the same beige coat, but underneath it was a neatly pressed light blue blouse. Her hair was carefully tied back, and although faint circles still rested beneath her eyes, there was determination in her expression that had been missing before. She stood straight despite obvious nervousness, clutching a small notebook and an inexpensive handbag. I hope I'm not late, she said quietly. Nathan smiled. You beat me by 8 minutes. A tiny laugh escaped before she could stop it. He spent the next hour showing her how the bakery operated. Unlike modern chain stores, Carter's Bread House still relied on handwritten inventory sheets, recipes passed down through generations, and regular customers who preferred conversation over speed. Emily listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions rather than pretending she already understood. She learned astonishingly fast. By lunchtime, she had memorized the prices of every loaf, organized the receipt drawer, and suggested rearranging several shelves so families could easily reach children's treats without blocking the line. Nathan watched with quiet surprise. She possessed an instinct for organization that years of raising 3 children had quietly developed. "I hope you don't mind," Emily said nervously after moving several display baskets. Nathan looked around. The bakery somehow felt brighter. "I think my father would have approved." The compliment caught her off guard. For years, nearly every decision she made had been criticized by someone. Hearing genuine appreciation felt unfamiliar. Over the following weeks, Thursdays slowly became Tuesdays and Saturdays as well. Business gradually improved, not because Emily performed miracles, but because customers enjoyed staying longer. She remembered names. She asked elderly customers how their gardens were growing. She wrapped birthday cakes with extraordinary care. She noticed details others overlooked. One afternoon, an elderly customer entered carrying a worn wooden cane. His name was Walter Jenkins, a 78-year-old retired carpenter whose broad frame had become thinner after a hip injury several years earlier. Thick silver eyebrows rested above kind green eyes, while neatly combed white hair framed a deeply weathered face. Walter spoke slowly, often repeating stories from decades ago because loneliness had left him with few listeners. Emily listened to every word. When Walter left carrying 2 fresh loaves of bread, he smiled at Nathan. "I've been buying bread here 20 years, he said. "This place finally feels like home." Nathan never forgot those words. The girls soon became part of the bakery as naturally as the smell of cinnamon. Every afternoon after school, Emily picked them up before bringing them to work for a few hours. Lily quietly finished homework at a corner table, occasionally helping fold pastry boxes with careful precision. Emma delighted every customer by proudly announcing which muffins had just come out of the oven, though Nathan gently reminded her not to reveal every surprise before people reached the display. Little Grace appointed herself Marmalade's official caretaker. The lazy orange cat tolerated endless hugs with remarkable patience, only opening one sleepy eye whenever Grace insisted he needed another imaginary blanket. The bakery, once silent except for humming ovens, now echoed with laughter, tiny footsteps, crayons scratching across paper, and cheerful conversations. Nathan discovered something unexpected. Instead of distracting him, the noise made him happier. Some evenings after closing, the girls helped wipe tables while Emily swept the floor. Nathan packed leftover pastries into small paper bags for them to take home. Emily protested every single time. "You've already done enough." Nathan always answered the same way. "They'll only become stale tomorrow." Neither of them admitted they both knew that wasn't the real reason. One evening, while locking the bakery, Nathan noticed Lily standing quietly outside watching families cross the street together. "Dad always carried Grace," she whispered without looking at him. Nathan remained silent. "I don't miss him," Lily added after several seconds. "I just miss having a dad." The words settled heavily inside him. He wanted to say something comforting. Instead, he simply rested a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. Sometimes silence carried more kindness than advice ever could. Weeks passed peacefully. Emily slowly stopped apologizing every time she accepted help. She laughed more often. The deep tension that had once lived permanently across her shoulders slowly began disappearing. For the first time since arriving in Vermont, she no longer felt like someone merely surviving. She felt safe. Nathan found himself looking forward to each workday, not because business had improved, but because the bakery no longer greeted him with silence every morning. Then, on an ordinary Saturday afternoon, as rain clouds quietly gathered over Main Street once again, a polished black SUV rolled slowly past the bakery. It didn't stop. It circled the block. Then it passed the front window a second time. Emily looked up just long enough to see the vehicle. The color drained from her face. Without saying a word, she gripped the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. Nathan immediately knew. Someone from her past had finally found them. The warm colors of early summer slowly settled over the Vermont hills, but inside Carter's bread house, an invisible chill had begun replacing the comfort that had filled the bakery for weeks. Emily barely slept after seeing the black SUV. Every time the brass bell above the bakery door rang, her shoulders stiffened. She instinctively searched every unfamiliar face before forcing herself to smile at customers. Nathan noticed the change immediately. The woman who had gradually rediscovered laughter now seemed to be listening for danger hidden inside every ordinary sound. She finally told him everything after closing one evening. "He found us." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Nathan remained silent, allowing her to continue. It isn't because he misses the girls. Emily stared at the cooling ovens. It's because someone told him I was doing well. She slowly explained what had happened. Jason Brooks had always cared more about appearances than relationships. During their marriage, he constantly worried about what neighbors, relatives, and business partners thought of him. Every family gathering became another opportunity for his parents to remind Emily that producing a son was her responsibility. When Grace was born, Jason had never blamed his own ignorance of biology. Instead, he blamed Emily, allowing his family's cruel expectations to become his own. Now that she had escaped and quietly rebuilt her life, his pride could not accept it. He doesn't want his daughters, Emily said softly. He wants control. If people think I can live without him, then he loses. Nathan clenched his jaw. For the first time since Emily had entered his bakery, genuine anger settled inside him. The following afternoon, Jason finally appeared. He stepped through the bakery door dressed in an expensive charcoal gray suit that looked completely out of place in the little Vermont town. Jason Brooks was 38 years old, tall with broad shoulders, and carefully styled black hair streaked neatly with expensive pomade. His clean-shaven face carried sharp features that many people would call handsome, but his cold gray eyes lacked warmth. Every smile seemed carefully rehearsed rather than sincerely felt. Years of building a successful construction business had taught him how to appear respectable in public while quietly manipulating people behind closed doors. His gaze ignored the display of fresh bread. Instead, it settled directly on Emily. "So this is where you've been hiding." The bakery became completely silent. Emily instinctively stepped backward. Nathan calmly moved beside her. Jason's eyes shifted toward Nathan before a faint smile appeared. "You must be the baker." Nathan answered evenly. "And you must be Jason." Jason laughed softly. "I've come to see my daughters." Emily looked directly at him for the first time. "No." The single word surprised even herself. Jason's smile faded. "You don't get to decide that." Before the conversation could become louder, Nathan pointed quietly toward the front door. "My customers don't come here to watch arguments." Jason stared at him for several long seconds. Then he adjusted his jacket. "You seem like a decent man," he said calmly. "Be careful believing every story you hear." Emily always enjoyed playing the victim. Without waiting for a response, he walked outside. But he had already accomplished exactly what he wanted. Within days, rumors spread through town. Some people whispered that Emily had kidnapped Jason's daughters. Others claimed she refused to let a loving father see his children. Jason visited nearby businesses wearing expensive suits and carrying photographs of himself smiling beside the girls years earlier. He presented himself as a heartbroken father simply trying to reunite his family. Emily recognized the strategy immediately. He always makes himself look like the good guy first. Nathan refused to let her face it alone. The next morning, he drove 40 minutes to meet someone he had trusted since childhood. Michael Turner was 46 years old, a family attorney with sandy blonde hair beginning to gray around the temples and thoughtful blue eyes that missed very little. His square face carried permanent lines earned through decades of listening to broken families tell impossible stories. He dressed simply despite his success, usually wearing rolled-up sleeves instead of expensive jackets. Years earlier, Michael had lost his younger sister after she remained too long in an abusive marriage because nobody believed her. Since then, he had quietly devoted much of his career to protecting parents and children trapped in similar situations. Nathan explained everything. Michael listened without interrupting. When the story ended, he leaned back quietly. "Tell Emily she's not fighting this by herself anymore." The support spread farther than either of them expected. Walter Jenkins immediately offered to testify about the patience Emily showed every customer. Parents whose children had visited the bakery spoke warmly about how naturally she cared for every little girl and boy who walked through the door. Teachers remembered how involved Emily remained despite working 2 jobs. Even customers who barely knew her found themselves defending her whenever rumors appeared. For the first time in years, Emily looked around and realized something extraordinary. People believed her, not because she begged them to, because they had seen who she truly was. As Nathan locked the bakery that evening, Emily stood quietly beside him beneath the fading sunlight. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were not tears of fear. I've spent years thinking I had to survive everything alone, she whispered. Nathan gently smiled. You don't anymore. Emily looked toward the warmly lit bakery where her 3 daughters laughed inside with Marmalade sleeping beside them. For the first time since leaving her marriage, she finally believed those words might actually be true. A cool September morning settled over the courthouse square beneath pale blue skies. Golden maple leaves drifted across the stone steps as townspeople quietly gathered, knowing this day would decide the future of 3 little girls. Emily hardly slept the night before. She sat awake in the small apartment she shared with her daughters, watching each child breathe peacefully as though trying to memorize the life she might lose. Lily had curled protectively around little Grace during the night, while Emma slept with one hand still clutching the stuffed rabbit she had carried since moving to Vermont. Looking at them gave Emily strength, but it also reminded her what was at stake. Nathan arrived outside the courthouse before sunrise. He wasn't wearing the flour-dusted apron everyone associated with him. Instead, he wore a neatly pressed navy suit that had belonged to his late father. Although it fit him well, he looked slightly uncomfortable wearing formal clothes, as though honesty came more naturally to him than polished appearances. Still, when Emily stepped out of her car and saw him waiting quietly near the entrance, the fear inside her eased just enough for her to breathe again. Inside the courtroom, Jason appeared confident. His attorney, Richard Collins, was a tall man in his early 50s with neatly combed silver hair, narrow brown eyes, and a perfectly tailored black suit. His voice remained calm, even while delivering ruthless arguments. Years of winning difficult custody cases had earned him a reputation for dismantling witnesses without raising his voice. Losing his own father during childhood had made Richard believe emotions complicated justice, leaving him to trust evidence more than sympathy. The hearing began. Richard painted a picture of Emily as an unstable woman who had taken 3 children away from a successful father. He emphasized her modest income, her small apartment, and the long hours she worked between the bakery and her evening job. Every sentence was carefully chosen to suggest that love alone could not provide security. Emily listened without interrupting. Her hands trembled beneath the table. Michael Turner rose slowly. Instead of attacking Jason immediately, he simply invited witnesses to speak. The first was Mrs. Rebecca Hill. Rebecca, a 42-year-old elementary school teacher, had taught both Lily and Emma during their first year in Vermont. She was an average-height woman with shoulder-length blonde hair beginning to show a few silver strands and kind green eyes hidden behind thin reading glasses. Patient by nature, Rebecca had spent nearly 20 years helping children overcome fear after difficult family situations. She described how Lily had arrived withdrawn, rarely speaking above a whisper. Today, Rebecca told the judge, she volunteers to read aloud in class. Children don't make changes like that unless they finally feel safe. Next came George Whitman, Emily's landlord. George was 65, broad-shouldered despite his age, with a thick gray beard and rough hands shaped by decades of maintaining rental properties himself. Although his serious appearance intimidated strangers, people who knew him respected his fairness. He testified that Emily had never missed rent despite working exhausting hours, and that every apartment inspection revealed the same thing. The place isn't fancy, George admitted, but those girls are always clean, healthy, respectful, and obviously loved. One after another, familiar faces entered the courtroom. Walter Jenkins spoke about watching Emily patiently help elderly customers without ever expecting praise. Several regular customers described seeing her comfort frightened children while somehow keeping the bakery running smoothly. Parents from town explained how naturally Emily cared for every child she met, not only her own daughters. Then Nathan took the witness stand. The courtroom grew unusually quiet. Nathan answered every question without exaggeration. I've watched Emily almost every day for months, he said. I've seen her skip meals so the girls could have something better. I've watched her finish one job, then begin another without complaining. I've never once heard her speak badly about Jason in front of the children. He looked briefly toward the judge before continuing. But I have seen what happens whenever his name appears on her phone. His voice remained calm. She doesn't fear losing money. She doesn't fear losing arguments. She fears her daughters losing the peace they've finally found. Then Nathan turned toward Jason. You've never come to my bakery asking how your daughters are doing. You only came after discovering Emily had built a life without needing your permission. No one interrupted him. Emily finally testified. Her voice shook during the first few sentences, but grew steadier with every memory she shared. I don't claim to be a perfect mother, she said. I've made mistakes. I've worked too many hours. I've cried after my daughters fell asleep because I didn't know how I'd pay next month's bills. She paused, but they have never questioned whether I love them. The courtroom remained silent. Several days later, the decision arrived. The judge concluded that Emily had consistently provided safety, stability, and emotional care despite overwhelming hardship. Jason's behavior demonstrated repeated attempts to control rather than genuinely parent his children. Emily received full legal and physical custody. Jason was granted supervised visitation only after completing counseling and anger management requirements. Outside the courthouse, autumn sunlight warmed the stone steps. Emily closed her eyes as tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. For years she had survived. For the first time in a very long time. She was finally free. Nearly a year passed after the court's decision, and with every changing season, Carter's bread house became less like a bakery and more like the heart of the little Vermont town. Spring flowers returned to the sidewalks, summer tourists filled Main Street. Autumn painted the maple trees crimson, and through every season one thing remained constant: the laughter inside the bakery. Neither Nathan nor Emily rushed toward romance. Both understood that healing deserved patience. Instead of trying to replace what had been lost, they quietly built something entirely new, one ordinary day at a time. Nathan continued waking before dawn to prepare bread, but now he no longer unlocked the bakery alone. Emily usually arrived just after sunrise, carrying fresh coffee for both of them. They rarely spoke much during those first quiet hours. Comfortable silence had become its own language. The girls grew alongside the bakery. Lily, now more confident than the frightened child who had first entered the shop, asked Nathan if he would teach her how to bake real bread instead of simply watching. Every Saturday morning, he showed her each step. He explained how dough could never be forced to rise before it was ready. People aren't very different, he smiled. They grow best when someone believes in them. Lily never forgot those words. Emma discovered she loved decorating cakes. Her imagination seemed endless. Every birthday cake somehow became covered with colorful flowers, tiny animals, or smiling faces. Nathan often laughed when her designs ignored perfect symmetry. The happiest cakes, he always told customers, are never perfectly straight. Little Grace still preferred only one job. Whenever she became sleepy during the afternoon, she climbed into Nathan's lap while he sat reading invoices behind the counter. Within minutes, she would fall asleep against his shoulder, completely trusting him without ever realizing how precious that trust truly was. Even Marmalade seemed younger. The old orange cat now spent most afternoons following the girls instead of sleeping alone beside the front window, accepting endless hugs with the patience only an elderly animal could possess. Emily often watched these ordinary moments from across the bakery. Sometimes she caught herself smiling before realizing she was doing it. There had been a time when she believed kindness always demanded repayment. Nathan had quietly taught her otherwise. He never tried to replace anyone. He never pressured the girls to call him anything. He simply showed up every day. Slowly, reliability became love. One snowy December evening, after closing the bakery, Emily found Nathan repairing a loose wooden chair in the dining area. "I've been meaning to ask you something," she said. Nathan looked up. "What is it?" She hesitated before speaking. "Why did you help us that first day?" Nathan smiled exactly as he had nearly a year earlier. "Because 4 people walked into my bakery looking cold." Emily laughed softly. "No." She stepped closer. "I mean, why did you keep helping?" Nathan rested the screwdriver on the table. "When my parents died, I thought loneliness was something you learned to live with." He looked toward the empty chairs. "Then you and the girls walked through that door." He smiled gently. "I realized loneliness isn't cured by finding the right person. It's cured by finding the right family." Emily quietly wiped away a tear. Exactly 1 year after the rainy afternoon that had changed everything, Nathan closed the bakery early. The girls believed they were simply cleaning before going home. Instead, Nathan gathered everyone near the front window where the rain softly tapped against the glass, almost exactly as it had 12 months earlier. He took a small velvet ring box from his apron pocket. His hands trembled more than they had while making bread on his very first day running the bakery. "Emily," he said softly, "I don't just love you. I love Saturday mornings with Lily. I love Emma covering my bakery with frosting. I love carrying Grace upstairs when she falls asleep. I love every noisy, ordinary moment that came into my life because the four of you walked through my front door." He took a slow breath. "I thought I was asking one person to marry me." He smiled toward the girls. "But the truth is, I'm asking 4 people if you'll let me spend the rest of my life loving this family." Emily covered her mouth as tears streamed freely down her cheeks. Before Nathan could even open the ring box completely, she nodded. "Yes." The girls erupted into laughter and tears at the same time. Grace clapped excitedly without understanding why everyone else was crying. A few months later, the little white church at the end of Main Street filled with neighbors, customers, and friends. Walter Jenkins proudly walked Emily down the aisle after asking permission with tears already in his eyes. Michael Turner smiled from the front pew. Rebecca Hill hugged all 3 girls before the ceremony began. When the vows ended, the pastor introduced them as the Carter family. As they walked back down the aisle together, Lily quietly reached for Nathan's hand. "Dad." The word came naturally. Emma smiled. "We love you, Dad." Little Grace wrapped both arms around his leg. "You're my daddy now." Nathan felt tears blur his vision. For years he believed the greatest blessing he could ever receive would be finding a wife. Standing beside Emily and their 3 daughters, he finally understood the truth. The greatest gift God had given him was not simply someone to love. It was a home filled with people who chose to love one another. And everyone who witnessed their story understood one lasting truth. A woman's worth is never measured by whether she gives birth to sons or daughters. Real love never counts children by gender. It recognizes the beauty of the heart that raises them. Before we say goodbye, I'd like to leave you with one simple thought. Sometimes we spend our lives asking God for a miracle, expecting something dramatic to appear overnight. But many of his greatest miracles arrive quietly. They come disguised as an open door on a rainy afternoon, a stranger willing to listen, or a kind heart that refuses to walk away. Emily believed she had no value because she couldn't give her husband a son. But God had never measured her worth by the opinions of broken people. He measured it by the love she poured into her daughters every single day. And when the time was right, he placed someone in her path who could see what he had seen all along. Maybe someone watching today feels forgotten, rejected, or believes life has already passed them by. If that's you, don't lose hope. God's timing is often different from ours, but his plans are never without purpose. The chapter you're living today is not the end of your story. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need a little hope today. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from or what part of this story spoke to you the most. And if you enjoy stories that remind us of faith, kindness, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and join our growing family. May God bless you, protect your home, fill your heart with peace, guide every step you take, and remind you every day that you are deeply loved. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.